in. Okay, Kenya.
Okay, I think we're ready to go, Casey.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Casey Keene. I am the Online Resources and Education Manager at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar entitled Selling Social Change, Exploring What Works and Making the Case for Prevention. This webinar is hosted by the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence and is intended for domestic violence advocates, preventionists, and other stakeholders with an interest in encouraging investment in prevention. The PreventIPV project has engaged advocates and preventionists in a series of focus groups and interviews to gain insight into what works and what is needed in order to best make the case for prevention to funders and foundations, businesses and non-traditional partners, communities, policymakers, and in our own movement minds. On this webinar, we'll hear from Jonathan Iglesias, Prevention Advisor for the project, who will share key preliminary findings from these discussions, and we'll invite you to share your insights as well. We are happy to be joined today by David Lee, who many of you recognize from Prevent Connect. He'll be sharing some lessons learned and national trends to help frame our conversation. Our moderator today, Lorien Castelle, who's organized today's session, will help draw connections between these findings and what we've learned through experience in the field. We are also very excited to be joined by Gloria Aguilera-Terry and Hilda Gutierrez from the Texas Council on Family Violence, and Kelly Starr and Eileen Stoll from the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, who will offer and reflect on strategies in their own states for encouraging investment in prevention. First, we'd like to learn a little bit about you. There's a feedback feature located on the left-hand side under the presenter's picture. You can see us there. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I'd like you to respond by clicking on the answer that applies to you. So let's go ahead and try it. Will you load our first question?
Yes, and actually the first question is going to be present on the PowerPoint screen right in front of the group. So they should be able to see it now. And you can click on what your response is. So I just clicked on my answer.
I'm not seeing it on my screen, Kenya.
Do you see it now?
Okay, I do see it. So the question is, what role do you currently serve in? And you can click on your answer here. A, domestic or sexual violence victim advocate. B, domestic or sexual violence preventionist. C, public health professional. D, state or national TA provider. E, funder or grant-making agency. And F, if you're other, please chat your answer below, and we'll be sharing the results in a moment. Hopefully people have had a chance to respond. Kenya, would you share the results?
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we've got a fairly good chunk of you who identify as preventionists in sexual or domestic violence. That's wonderful. Several of you are state or national TA providers. Great. We're so happy to have you. A lot of domestic and sexual violence victim advocates. We do have some representation from public health and funders or grant-making agencies. Others, if you could, I see that you're chatting here. Let me see, program director, advocate, and preventionist. Thank you so much. Forensic interviewer, batterer intervention program, male violence prevention, wonderful. We're so happy to have all of you joining us today. Thank you for giving us a chance to get to know you. We're going to go ahead now to our next question. Go ahead, Kenya, if you could load that next question. And I love that people are commenting on being an advocate and a preventionist. I think that's a really important point, and I think you'll see that reflected in what Jonathan shares with us this afternoon. So the next question that you're seeing now, where is your agency in terms of prevention? Just to get a sense of where you are, choose A if you're getting started, B if you're building internal capacity, C if you're getting buy-in or engaging funders at this point, D if you're implementing and evaluating, and there's an other option if you have a different way of thinking about where you are in terms of prevention. So please take a moment to respond. Okay, great. So it looks like many of you, most of you, are at the stage where you're implementing and evaluating your programs. That's really helpful for us to know, and we're really glad for those of you who are in those early stages that you're joining us today. I think there's going to be information that's shared in today's session that's going to be relevant to you no matter where you are in the process, but certainly helpful to know that you're in that implementation and evaluation stage. So I think those are the questions for now. We'll go back to our slides. Okay. Before I pass the floor on to our moderator, I'd like to provide a little context regarding the PreventIPV project. Many of you may already be familiar with the work of the IPV Prevention Council. The IPV Prevention Council formed in 2011 as a voluntary association of domestic violence coalitions, and they envision a future in which a wide network of collaborative and sustained primary prevention efforts can lead to the social change necessary to end intimate partner violence. The goal really around this project is having a unified national voice for prevention, which we invite all of you to be a part of, to contribute to, and to create visibility for. The purpose of the Council is to promote prevention as a sustainable priority for coalitions and local domestic violence programs, and to focus on engagement of federal partners, funders, allied organizations, all who can see IPV prevention as critical to the work that we're doing together. This is a list of who's participating on the steering committee for the IPV Prevention Council, and we're really excited to have Gloria on today's webinar with us, as she is certainly represented on the steering committee, so we're looking forward to hearing more from her. Now let me tell you, I'll back up here a little bit, let me tell you a little bit about our moderator, Lorien Castelle. Lorien's been a prevention advisor to the IPV Prevention Project. Let me pull up her picture so you can see her pretty face. For 2 years now, and she's been instrumental to the development of the tools inventory and other key features of the preventipv.org website. Lorien has been an activist and an advocate for social justice for 2 decades. Many of you know her as the Director of Prevention for the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where she was from 2002 to 2013, and she was responsible for New York's Delta Project, designing activities that prevent domestic violence and can be integrated into established coordinated community response efforts. She provides a wide range of technical assistance, support, and training to domestic violence programs and allies throughout New York State and to statewide domestic violence coalitions and communities throughout the country. We are really grateful for Lorien's leadership in the prevention movement and for moderating this webinar. So now I'm going to pass it over to Lorien.
Thank you, Casey. It's been a real pleasure to be a consultant to the IPV Prevention Council, and I've learned a lot through the process. But Casey, I'd just like to give you a shout out for all that you do for the domestic violence community, and what a tremendous support and resource that you've been over the years, but especially on this particular project. on helping to create the PreventIPV.org website and for bringing all of these webinars together. Thank you so much.
My
so
pleasure.
To kick us off, thank you. To kick us off, we have asked Jonathan Iglesias, who is also an advisor to the PreventIPV project, to share some of the key findings from his focus groups and interviews with advocates and preventionists around making the case for prevention. What I love about this project is that it is absolutely practitioner informed. And this is an opportunity to hear from others who did not participate in those interviews or focus groups about what you're finding is successful in terms of making the case. We'd like to invite you, as he presents, to consider your own experiences and your own perspectives on the data. And let me tell you a little bit about Jonathan before he gets started. Jonathan Iglesias is the RTE Program Coordinator for the Washington State Department of Health, where he provides strategic planning, development, and budgetary support to the state sexual violence prevention program. Prior to this, Jonathan served as the Prevention Projects Coordinator for the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, and he provided training, technical assistance, coaching, and resource development to professionals and communities who were engaged in primary prevention throughout Virginia. Jonathan, you have the floor.
All right. Hey, folks. Lorien, Casey, thanks for the intro. So I want to briefly kind of kick us off by discussing some of the conversations that we've had with the field. As Casey and Lorien mentioned, a lot of the work that's been coming out of the PreventIPV project, there have been lots of ideas coming from both the advisory committee or the council and from NRCDV, and a lot of this we've wanted to be very informed by and relevant to the community that it would be intended to serve, which are practitioners across the nation. So in keeping in line with that effort, what we did before talking about, before just developing tools for engagement, was we wanted to talk to folks in the field. And what we wanted to do was structure conversations around these four topics in particular. What language being used in the field of primary prevention of domestic violence and sexual violence? What language is being used to describe prevention? And who are folks describing prevention to? Who would they like to be able to reach with this language? So we wanted to focus on collecting some information around what types of audiences are being engaged and who folks are trying to reach. Another thing we wanted to know was what current approaches and frameworks are people utilizing that are working best for them. What's working most effectively in different spaces, and in what way is varying forms of language informing the different types of approaches that are being used. And the last thing we wanted to know through a lot of these conversations and focus groups was what support can be offered. With everything that's out there, with folks, what folks are doing and what the practice is looking like, what type of support and resource development can be offered from NRCDV and PreventIPV. So those were our essential, what we were reaching for, and there's a lot of information that came out of these focus groups and discussions, and I think there's a lot to build on. And as Lorien and Casey said, kind of think about as we go through this, in what ways this is either true to the work that you do in terms of engaging different types of folks, and in what way this can potentially help build or expand the narrative that you're telling in communities.
Presentation mode is now disabled. Presentation mode is now enabled.
All right, so here was the basic structure for how we decided to collect this information. We wanted to have focus groups, and due to time constraints and scheduling and all that sort of stuff, we didn't get to have quite as many focus groups as we wanted. So they ended up being 2 60 to 90-minute focus groups made up of 5 to 10 participants each, with representation from state DV and dual coalitions, national TA providers, prevention practitioners, agency directors, and some folks at coalitions who are designated media engagement staff and working on media projects. So as we expand and try to figure out what other audiences and what other types of practitioners we can reach, one of the audiences we'll be looking to is local DV prevention practitioners and folks at the local level. So before we get into the actual content, one of the things I want to know is, how do you all describe prevention to average Joe, to just anybody in your community who may not be aware of what violence prevention looks like or is?
So we would invite all of you to kind of chat your responses here in the public chat. How do you describe prevention to the average Joe? And Jonathan, can you see the responses starting to come in?
Yeah, I can.
So it looks like Lorien says stopping violence before it starts, changing attitudes and beliefs so violence is never used, getting ahead of the wave and being able to intervene before it happens, the proactive process of informing the community of ways to eliminate domestic or sexual violence, learning self-regulatory behaviors, promoting healthy behaviors to reduce overall perpetration, preventing abuse and promoting respect. It says many people are aware of the spectrum. People are typing so fast now, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Engaging children so that they don't engage in violent behaviors in their relationships, teaching healthy coping strategies, addressing the culture in which violence happens and changing the attitudes that allow it to happen, promoting healthy norms and behaviors, changing beliefs that violence against women is acceptable, engaging the community to be proactive. I think these are some pretty good responses, Jonathan.
Yeah, definitely. And we're seeing, I mean, it's funny, there's some of these responses are clearly kind of leaning towards public health language, and some are clearly leaning towards social justice, and there are others that are more pared down using very simple language. So it seems like there's a really wide variety of how folks are choosing to kind of describe prevention. These are all great. Asking questions. What behavior do you find acceptable? All right. Yeah, thank you everyone for participating in that. So along the same line of what you all are describing, this is what we found in these focus groups. Folks are really trying to pare down the language and use simple, clear, and concise wording and messaging. The words most commonly used among folks that were part of the focus group were things like respect, which you all, your responses were very much riddled with words like respect, gender respect, health. Phrases like creating a world where ... ending violence, dream happy and full lives. Things that people were trying to steer clear of or stray away from was using language from within our field, both social justice and public health. So this was actually a part of the conversation that was interesting, because a lot of folks said, well, we don't want to use our jargon, we don't want to use our internal language because this isn't something that most people are familiar with, that average Joe would be responsive to. And so the questions that I had was, okay, so when we talk about our language, are we talking about public health or advocacy and social justice? What are we talking about? And for the most part, kind of across the board, people said, yeah, none of that. It needs to be very pared down, respect, health, ending violence, those types of things. So another thing that we wanted to figure out was how are folks letting their communities and the people that they're engaged with, how are folks letting people know that their prevention efforts are working? And this kind of broke off into 4 different messages. The first one being that there's an understanding that this prevention work is social change work, and that this isn't something that can change overnight, and drawing upon social justice movements in our collective history that that took a lot of mobilization and a lot of community effort and a lot of buy-in from different groups of people. The second one being that success is most often demonstrated anecdotally. Folks, as an example, were using stories to describe how they know that the prevention is working. So somebody mentioned that one of their programs was implementing an empathy building and skills building prevention program in an elementary school, and that they had staff and school administrators and even the principal come to them and report that that there was a change in referrals to principal's office and in administrative punishment that was happening. So they were seeing that this change was taking place in this given community, in this context, in this school. And so these were stories that prevention staff were elevating and demonstrating as their prevention programming working. Another thing was seeing prevention being sustained by and evolving within communities. One thing that a lot of folks were saying was that it's when they see that the programming changes in a way that they hadn't expected, or is truly being community-led in a way that they would describe as community-led, that this is a demonstration of success, and that this is a demonstration of prevention working in that particular community. Another thing, similar to looking to social change work and this work being something that doesn't just change overnight, folks are drawing on the trajectory of other public health and social justice movements, looking for indicators of success, to say that we're on the right track and that we're making strides in a way that's compatible with what other movements have seen and other successful kind of arenas have utilized. And this is just a quote from one of the focus groups. I think at a statewide level, it's harder to demonstrate change. So for local programs, it's easier to see how this impacts community members. They witness change every day, and they relay this to us. With the coaches that I work with, they always say the same thing. The work I'm doing, I'm not going to see the impact until 20 years down the line. So this really demonstrates the kind of, again, that social change. This isn't going to be change that happens overnight kind of mentality. So another thing we wanted to talk about was how people are actually describing their work, and in what ways they're being clear about what their roles are in the change that they seek to create. So a lot of folks, and I feel like this resonates with people who have done prevention work or public health or any type of work that's related to prevention, oftentimes you'll find that you tell people what you do and in what way you're connected to the movement, and if someone isn't an integral part of that movement or isn't necessarily familiar with what you do, they tend to translate it to, oh, so you're a social worker, or you work with law enforcement, or you catch the bad guys. And so I was curious to know, and we were curious to know in what ways people are making distinctions about what specifically they do. Most folks described what they do in terms of prevention as being program development or support for communities who are doing social change work. Someone mentioned being in the business of changing minds and moving from awareness to behavior. But what we found in talking to folks and engaging in these conversations was that we've done a lot of work to describe prevention and to effectively communicate that, but not necessarily the same work in defining what exactly we do. So there's no common language to describe what practitioners and what preventionists are actually doing out there. Folks are being innovative with how they're describing it, though. So second question is, and I'm guessing, Casey, we'd want folks to go ahead and respond in the chat box. Which approach do you most often use to successfully engage partners?
And actually, Jonathan, we do have this question preloaded. Kenya, can you go ahead and share this question? Thank you. So you'll see the options here. What approach do you most often use to successfully engage partners? Cost-benefit analysis, public health, social justice, focus on youth and families, or other? If you have an alternative answer, feel free to chat it in the chat box. Okay, Kenya, if you've got enough responses, can you share that with us?
All right, so it looks like we have a good number of folks using social justice and focus on youth and families. Some people are using the public health approach. And surprising a minority that's using cost-benefit analysis. So in the focus groups, what was kind of thematic were these three approaches, which a lot of you seem to be doing. Focus on healthy youth and supporting pathways to a healthy adult living. The idea that this is social change work and that we're not going to see the change for 20 years down the line. And the third being a proactive, cost-effective response to rates of victimization. These were the three ways, overwhelmingly, that people were describing prevention to different audiences. The next polling question, who is it most important that our messages reach, in your opinion?
Kenya, can you load that question? Thank you. So policymakers and funders, allied social justice and public health, the average Joe, our own movement, or men, who do you think it's most important that our messages reach? And if you think there's an alternative answer, we'd be happy to have it there. We see all and more. Kenya, if you've got enough responses, maybe you can go ahead and share.
All right, it looks like most everybody, majority of folks answered average Joe and policymakers and funders. Very little are concerned about our own movement. And we had a minority of folks saying that men should be our priority. So you guys largely fit in line with what folks were saying in these discussions. The major focuses for our audience were these four areas, these four audiences in particular. So the first being policymakers and funders, second, community members, average Joe. The third being state organizers and allied health and social justice. There was a lot of talk about leveraging what funds and what work is being done in reproductive health and in other social justice movements. The fourth being our own movement and program directors. So the folks who maybe are in advocacy and service delivery organizations who aren't necessarily bought into prevention yet. And these are a few quotes that came out of that discussion. If you look at this first quote about policymakers, there's a lot of concern around political minds not necessarily buying into or having the time to be a part of a movement that isn't politically expedient for them. And so if you consider those approaches, those three approaches that were mentioned earlier, the proactive, cost-effective response to rates of victimization, that is a good way to message prevention. You can kind of see how those approaches fit with these different audiences that are being discussed. So one of the big things that people wanted to see was an accessible cost savings example, some sort of a compendium of examples that can illustrate what the cost savings is for preventing domestic violence. Another thing was messages to use in allying with other social justice and public health folks. We have a lot of examples and demonstrations of how this is effectively done, but there's no blueprint or template for what type of language and how to kind of make the initial engagement with folks in those movements. The other thing was, and this is something that I think we're all kind of hungry for, concrete examples of outer layer prevention strategies, and something that feeds into that, tools to change public narrative, which would very much roll into what some of these outer layer strategies might look like. So I mean, feel like this kind of gives up where I stand in terms of framework, but this was kind of the feeling, the overwhelming feeling and take-home message of these discussions and of these focus groups, which were really wonderful and gave us a lot of information, and I think we can really start to expand on that. Prevention is an undercover revolution, and working to permanently end violence is a revolutionary act. That was something that someone said that really stuck with me, and I think kind of puts me in that social justice language circle and framework. But I think there's a lot that we can expand on, and there's a lot of good information that is going to inform in what way PreventIPV decides to work with folks around engagement and support practitioners who are engaging their communities.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's really great stuff that you were able to share there. And I think we got a lot of good information from all of the folks who are weighing in on the chat. Helen, if you cannot see the slides, if you go up to a button that says PreventIPV, it's a tab right across the top of your screen. You should be able to select the slides again. Let us know if you can't do that, and we'll give you some more technical support. Okay, so I'd actually like to introduce our next presenter, David Lee, a good friend and collaborative partner in all things prevention, and many of you know him and maybe even know him well. David manages Prevent Connect, which, as you know, is a national online project which is dedicated to the primary prevention of sexual assault and domestic violence. He works for the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. David will review now for us some key lessons that he's learned through the Prevent Connect project, sharing some national trends to inform today's conversation. We've asked David to reflect on really the last decade and to share from his unique perspective, which is this sort of 50,000-foot view, how the conversation about primary prevention has changed over the years. David.
Thank you, Lorien. I was just so busy tweeting the Jonathan's last quote that he put on the last slide because I thought that was awesome. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you, National Resource Center on Domestic Violence and the PreventIPV for having me join this. This is real exciting. I really have loved the work and have had a chance to work with all of you over the last 10 years nationally around this our efforts, and really have seen a lot of shifts and excitement. And I see, looking at the people who are on this web conference, we have some great leaders of people who have been doing a lot of work with, whether it's in your local communities, within your states, and within the country. So you're probably all familiar with Prevent Connect. If you're not familiar with it, then I'm going to encourage you to come to our website. I'm writing it into the text chat right now. And go ahead, and we have a whole range of web conferences, blogs, e-learning units, podcasts, a wiki, all on prevention, and a lot of social media. And it's a place that we say it's an online discussion with authentic voices sharing contributions and insights about prevention, because the way that we're going to learn is from each other. It's not, we can't wait for researchers to tell us. We want researchers to be part of the discussion, but we have to do that together, and that's what we call an e-learning collaborative of what we're trying to be able to do. So to me, when Lorien and I were talking about this, we were talking about the lessons, and I think 10 years ago when I started this, the talk of prevention was about awareness. How do we make people aware about domestic violence? How do we make people aware of sexual assault? And what I've seen now is a very profound change, and we really are looking at culture change. And that culture change might be used in what Jonathan presented was really interesting. Some people frame it as social change, but some people also frame it in how we work with youth and families, and some people frame it in public health language. But those are different ways. But I find that this is, I think, a real shift of how we as a movement approach this work. Now, we've always had culture change as something we wanted, but I think we're now really thinking about our programming being that way, and we're building on the awareness work that we've done over the last 30 and 40 years to be able to move towards that culture change, and that's the work that we're doing. And that, I think, is a real profound change that I have seen just in the last 10 years. I also think that we've seen and this came up, I think, earlier in the comments when people introducing themselves and they had to pick whether they were an advocate or a preventionist, and I saw many people resisting it. And I think that we used to see prevention as a separate activity. That was someone's piece that they had to do on their own, and what we're now starting to see is that prevention is connected to our intervention work, and it's also connected to other issues with common risk and protective factors. And I do want to highlight the report that I put a picture on there. That's called Connecting the Dots, and it's a report that the CDC just put out looking at across different forms of violence, common risk and protective factors, because what we might want to be doing, and I'll go ahead and put a link to Connecting the Dots onto the text chat now, since I'm going to try to do that writing at the same time as I am talking trick that I'm somewhat experienced in doing. So what we can do is we can see that this is just an example of using research to look at that we know there's issues and that we know around some ways that there's common risk factors that are going to be around domestic violence, sexual violence, and other issues that we can be, other types of violence, youth violence, and even other issues looking at, we need to be able to look at those, and this is a way that we're seeing prevention is a way that we build those connections and those linkages. And I think the work that we're doing now is so much more around coming up with those linkages, and that comes both in people that look at this from the public health frame, but also from ways that people are looking at this from a social justice frame, realizing that we have to connect to other social justice efforts. And so that's another profound change that I'm seeing. In some ways, we were talking about making the case, but I think that we actually are going beyond saying whether we need to have, it's not whether or not there is prevention, it's now figuring out how is prevention at the center of our work. And I was talking about, before I was at Prevent Connect, I was at a local domestic violence agency, and actually my job included overseeing the shelter of our agency, and we talked a lot about the metaphor of our agency, what was the heart of our agency. And to me, what we want to do is start thinking about how we were an agency that the services were important that we provided for survivors, but with the heart of our work was how we were working to prevent domestic violence within our community. And I think now we're trying to think about how is prevention related to everything, and while we maintain providing those services, if we want to be able to fulfill our missions, which is fundamentally around the issue of how do we end domestic violence in our communities, that we need to be able to place prevention in the center, and I'm seeing more and more of that discussion going. While we still have lags in funding, whereas the funding is primarily living in the services, we are now seeing the prevention and the mission-driven work really be something that I think is important for where we're moving forward. So there's many trends that we've seen in the last years, and I just want to, recognize that teen dating violence is something that has grown from a topic barely talked about to having its national week to now having February as its entire month, and is a way that is drawing much attention. We've seen national initiatives that have been funded around addressing teen dating violence, a lot of focus with middle school that we're seeing increasingly, and this is a trend that we're seeing. We're looking at not just I call it curriculum and beyond. Because I think one of the trends that we're seeing is that we're trying to while we try to identify what curriculum, we're now thinking about what else can we do? What are the practices beyond those classroom presentations that many of us are familiar with? How do we find ways to actually lead to community change that go beyond those classroom, that might build upon or go beyond those classroom presentations? And so it's developing some of those strategies. And an important one that we're seeing this is a lot of youth leadership work. And I know we're going to, later on presenting over in Washington, they've really modeled some wonderful examples of youth leadership work within Washington State, so we'll be hearing about that. But youth leadership becomes an important theme that we can be able to move forward and look at ways to having people within the community not be just the targets of change, but become the agents of change to move forward, and that gives me great hope. Of course, an important theme has been the promotion of promoting what we want. And so we are having so much more discussion about promoting healthy relationships. And this was reflected in the research that Jonathan had done, and not just talking about what we're working against, but what we're working for, and using a healthy relationship lens to move forward. And what we're also starting to see more and more of is thinking about the strategies of how do we mobilize our community to be able to make change. And so whether it's the work that started in Boston, for example, from close to home, that now I'm seeing in California being replicated and in communities throughout the state of California and around the country, more people that are involved in efforts around that community mobilization. Wow, I'm talking fast. I think it's in our news today, and obviously the top news story this week and last week has been with the release of the video of Ray Rice, the horrific violence that we saw Ray Rice committing. But what it did is that I was interested to look at the discussion and how this discussion is different. And so in a blog that I wrote last week, I talked about, while there's still victim blaming and a lot of pieces that we find troubling, a lot of our national discussion is about trying to be able to clarify what the accurate information is. That there's a lot of discussion. You look at the comments that James Brown made, the announcer, the CBS Sports announcer made, which was really being very clear about we need to re-examine our gender roles to contribute to domestic violence. And I'm seeing an increasing demand that institutions like the NFL have policies, and not just have policies, but have them that they actually are enforced so they make a difference. And so when we start seeing this information and this looking at the re-examination of our gender roles and the policies on an institutional level, that is what prevention looks like. And that, I think, is a profound change from what I've seen in the way we approach these issues and the way that the media has even discussed it. And I think it's giving us an incredible opportunity of showing where we've gone and where we have the opportunity to go. So, and to me, when I look at prevention in 2014, a lot of it is thinking about how we're building, supporting, and sustaining our prevention practice. And the questions we're doing now is not what's important, but how do we actually do it? And we're really trying to look at and re-examine what are our strategies, our methods, the programming that we're doing. Jonathan talked about this. How do we measure that change? And that's important, and we realize this is long-term work, that we can't do it in the short term, and we're really trying to think about and be more resourceful in being able to think about that measurement of change, because that's important for us to be able to demonstrate not just to our funders, but also to ourselves, and to be able to know that we are moving forward. We also need to be able to look at what partnerships are necessary, and that we can't realize that this is not work that we can do on the own, and that we need to find other tables that we go to, and we have more people have those conversations, and so we can do that. And I think finally is to realize that we can't wait for the research to tell us what to do. That we have to learn, and there's some great work that was done out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that I really liked. That was really a fabulous work that talked about different types of evidence. They talked about best available research evidence, but they also talked about contextual evidence, and they talked about experiential evidence. And that practice-based evidence is what we have to draw on. And that's what I love about PreventIPV, is that we're gathering that practice-based evidence. That's what we're doing in Prevent Connect, is having people like you share your experiences to learn from each other, because that is where we're going to be able to move forward. And that's going to inform the new research agenda. And that's going to inform where we're going to be able to go. And so that's where I think we can be able to do, we can be able to move forward, to be able to see how we can be able to create change. So that is a quick and dirty, but my thoughts on sort of the state of last 10 years of prevention. So, Lorien, any thoughts that you have, or should we go to the question?
Let's go to the question. But David, I couldn't agree more that the national discourse is really different. We're just watching as things unfold, the way people are talking about recent national events in the media. Many more people talking about social norms and prevention and masculinity, and that's not something that we saw 10 years ago.
Yeah, I know, and I know when you were involved in the early stages of the Delta, we were, sort of grappling with that, and I know, that we've now, while we had those visions, we're now really, I think, starting to operationalize them. So I'd love to hear from the audience, just what are the positive signs they've seen of how do you see that prevention is becoming more central to our work in ending IPV? What are examples that you have seen within your organizations, within your communities, within your lives, that prevention becomes something that's important other than the proliferation of web conferences, though that might be one. So I'd love to be here, and and then I love how Mary says maybe we need to be looking at our movement, so we have to focus enough on cultural change. So let's go over and see some of these lessons learned, and I know, and I'll be what people have to say. So I just know what your experiences are. So go ahead and write, you know, how that moves forward. And so, you know, there's the batterers intervention programs and the training working to prevent their anger to leading to violence. So a piece of our work of batterers intervention programs, while being tertiary prevention afterwards, is an important piece of a comprehensive prevention element of what we can do. And we also can think about but now starting to think about that as a prevention piece. So I'd love to hear other people about what your thoughts of, what are some of the signs that prevention, how do you know that prevention is more central to the work that you're doing? So Debbie talks about, we language how we present our work. We mentioned both prevention and intervention in our agencies. And so that it's much more, and in fact, sometimes are people changing? A lot of times we often describe their agencies as shelters, and now I'm seeing people talk about them more as comprehensive, as domestic violence agencies that address domestic violence that do both. And more integration, and now people are starting to write, so it'll be a little easier. A prevention team. I remember back in the day working in a domestic violence agency when I literally was the prevention team, and now we're seeing more and more agencies that have that. And both the media and the average Joe are willing to address the issue of IPV, and I think we've really seen that, that this is a topic that people do talk about. They don't always talk about the way we want them to, but people are talking about it. When I started doing this work 30 years ago, people did not want to talk about this issue, and now we see them talking more. Well, thank you, Lorien. It's great to be able to see, and I'd love to hear, because you have some great guests here. They're going to share some of the exciting work that they've been doing.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you, David, so much for sharing your insights and your analysis. We really appreciate you being able to do that today for us. Our next guests are from the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, an organization that I've always held in very high regard, and I'm very grateful that they could join us today. Kelly Starr and Eileen Stoll are joining us. Kelly has worked in the Violence Against Women movement for over 20 years, and she is currently the Director of Communications at the Coalition in Washington. In this role, she developed and implemented a statewide strategic communications plan and authored Covering Domestic Violence, a guide for journalists and other media professionals, which is fabulous, and I wanted to look at all week this week. Eileen has been active in the movement to end violence against women since '92. She has worked at the Washington State Coalition since 2003, where she currently coordinates the prevention work and previously coordinated the Economic Justice Project, so two things that are very similar in nature. So take it away, you two.
Okay, this is Kelly. Thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to be talking with you about our Refuse to Abuse program. So Refuse to Abuse is a partnership. It's an 18-year partnership that we at the Coalition have had with our local baseball team, the Seattle Mariners. And there's a couple of parts to the program. It started, and one of the main components still is that it's a statewide community education campaign. And then a few years ago, we added a 5K run walk that takes place inside Safeco Field, which is the Mariners ballpark. And that's been an exciting addition for us because it's been a way to involve Mariners fans so that it's not just a campaign of us and the Mariners putting it out there. It's also a way that people can join in with the message of a refuse to abuse. So the campaign components, I'm just going to give you a brief overview, is that there's print, television, and radio ads. We have them both in Spanish and English. And each year, we, in partnership with the Mariners, identify current players and managers that are going to be the campaign spokespeople. So they are professional athletes out there saying the message that there's no excuse for domestic violence, refuse to abuse, and then we develop campaign ads around them. And the print ads run in the Mariners magazine, they're in the concourse in the stadium, and some years we have media sponsors. This year they ran in 34 community newspapers across the state as well. And the television ads run both in park and on local television stations, and the radio ads run on stations around the region that during the broadcast of Mariners games. The goals of the campaign, until a few weeks ago, professional sports teams were not known to be talking about domestic violence at all, and so the Mariners really were the first ones to take a public stand against domestic violence and to join us in this long-term partnership to be saying that, to recognize that they and professional athletes absolutely have a role to play in ending domestic violence, and by promoting healthy relationships really can influence culture change and can influence their fan base. Eileen's going to talk a bit about how our message over the last 18 years has shifted a bit from not only anti-violence, it's kind of started with that, with the tagline of there's no excuse for domestic violence, to a pro-respect message.
Thanks, Kelly. This is Eileen. So, I was really struck when I started at the Coalition, and now, 11 years later, how our message has really evolved. And like Kelly said, we really started with this idea of what we're against. And so the first ads had captions like, I will not hit a woman, I will not strike a woman, and those were contrasted with, hitters and pitchers saying those things. And then we really moved towards more of an engaging bystanders approach, where the Mariners would talk about how they were strong, not silent types, and really encourage people to speak up when they saw violence against women or abuse in people's relationships. And I think now we've we really have mirrored the trends in prevention. I don't think it was intentional. I think we're just all on the same page, where now we're really trying to message what we're for. And this, for me, has been really exciting because it enables us to have a positive message that everybody can get behind. It's pretty hard to stand in the corner that you don't want people to have healthy relationships. It's really easy, and it's a much easier thing for people to get involved and be excited about, to think about how everyone in their life deserves to be treated well, and that's what we want for everyone. And so that has been exciting for me to see, and I think that with the addition of the 5K that we've had, it's really enabled everyone to get involved in this big community to come together in this really joyful event that we do. This is reflected in our ads from this year. You'll see what they look like, and I just highlighted the actual text on it, which is really, again, this message of respect and trying to concretize that for people and let folks know, what does it look like to actually move towards this vision that we have where people have healthy relationships. And so really talking about how people have deep honor and respect for the game, and that actually is how we should treat our partners as well. So that has been an exciting move for me to kind of see us go forward, and I know that it'll also change and evolve as we sort of start figuring more things out.
Thanks, Eileen. This is Kelly again. So a lot of people ask us about what are the benefits of the Refuse to Abuse program for our work and how it matches the vision and goals of our organization. One of the key things is, this picture below is from our 5K walk run this year, and you just see this mass of people wearing these Refuse to Abuse shirts and joining us and joining the Mariners in taking a stand against domestic violence. And for us, it's been a great way to engage people that have traditionally been difficult for our movement to reach, young people, boys, men, and this Mariner fan base, which aren't people who have domestic violence or sexual assault in their titles or in their job descriptions, but here they are. And we often hear one of our main messages at the Coalition and in our media work is to talk about how we all have a role to play in ending domestic violence. And sort of the natural follow-up question to that is okay, I've bought into that, how do I get involved? And this is a way, the Refuse to Abuse program is a way for people to get involved. A great message. A great outcome of this campaign is that it has other people saying our message. I think we all experience this in our work, where it's one thing if we're out there saying domestic violence is wrong, domestic violence is preventable, we should promote healthy relationships, and it's another thing all together when other people are saying that, folks you wouldn't traditionally expect to be saying that. Felix Hernandez, a pitcher for the Mariners, saying that, a participant in the 5K saying that. So it really takes on more power, I think, when others begin repeating our messages for us. The other thing that this program has done and this partnership with the Mariners has done for us is it's given us an opportunity to create prevention products, actual concrete tools that Eileen's going to be talking about in a bit about how to start conversations with young people about healthy relationships. Again, we do so much work to say it's important to do this. Hey, talk to teens about what a healthy relationship looks like and feels like. And the natural follow-up question is, well, how do I do that? So this program has given us the opportunity to actually create tools and then gives us an audience to share them back with, which has been a great perk for our work. So just to give you a brief overview of the history of this program, it began actually in 1995, the Mariners in their first ever division win. The fans here adopted the phrase "refuse to lose." We were, as a baseball club, not favored to win it, and it just kind of kept winning game after game. And so the Refuse to Lose season was in 1995. And that prompted the leaders at the coalition at the time, who were huge Mariners fans and still are, to say, you know, they should really do Refuse to Abuse. That'd be such a great message and a great play on the Refuse to Lose season. And literally did a cold call ask to the Mariners. And the response that they got was, yeah, that seems like the right thing to do. And so it kind of, then it was like, okay, oh, they said yes. Okay, how do we do this? And just really kind of embarked on this adventure with them together. We had a bit of funding early on that gave us the opportunity to hire a consultant and do some focus groups. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But to really just kind of get the campaign going and develop a first TV spot. In 1998, we used some of our state contract money to develop the awareness campaign, and we started very early on bringing on other people to do this work on a pro bono basis. So this has actually never been a very well-funded project. It's been something that we've been committed to and the Mariners have been committed to, and it's been very creative leveraging of in-kind resources. So we brought on board a local marketing and PR firm to do all of the ad development on a pro bono basis, and actually they've been with us the entire 18 years of the campaign. The other thing that happened in 2010, we got a bit of a bump. There was, I don't know if you all remember, there was a big Pepsi Refresh campaign going on, which was Pepsi decided to not spend any of its advertising money on advertising in the traditional sense, but rather launch this Pepsi Refresh campaign where you could promote any kind of a community change effort, and people would vote and the winners would get funded. And they had a version for Major League Baseball, and the Mariners selected Refuse to Abuse, and then, so we did some activities around that, and it gave us a lot of new visibility. In 2012 is when we added the 5K run walk. As with most things in this campaign, it has started with an idea, and we ask them, and they say, sure. And then we try to figure out how to do it. So the 5K is the only 5K run walk that takes place entirely inside Safeco Field, and as I mentioned before, it's an opportunity for fans to really join in on the campaign. This past year we got a new media partner on the campaign that's also on a pro bono basis. Sound Publishing is the largest community newspaper organization in our state, and they have over 34 newspapers in the Puget Sound area, and so they donated a lot of in-kind advertising to run 3 guest columns that we wrote in all of their papers about domestic violence, prevention, how to get involved, where to turn for help, as well as running in all of the paper's full-page ads, the Refuse to Abuse ads that we showed you earlier. So that's given us a great new audience not only to share the campaign with, but to go a little deeper with our messaging with these op-eds and editorials. The successes of the campaign, I think, is getting at those points that both Jonathan and David were talking about around creating a cultural intolerance for abuse. You know, when we first started, it was really about increasing awareness, but over the years we've seen that people are repeating the messages, they're picking up the messages, the media is picking it up, and their fan base are speaking out against domestic violence. We have a link that I don't have time to go to today, but if you want to check it out, it's our fundraising page for the Refuse to Abuse 5K. And it's one of my favorite things to visit just now and again, because it's this page where all of these Mariners fans who participate in the Refuse to Abuse 5K walk run raise money for our work. And on those pages they all write about why they're doing it, why they're involved, and how they're mobilizing their own community. One of our top fundraisers over the years, he came by the other day and was just kind of wanted to share with me how his fundraising was going. And he told me about how he first got involved, honestly, because he was motivated by the top fundraising prize, which is throwing out a first pitch at a Mariners game. And that was really honest, great. That's why he wanted to do it. But then he told me that as he started raising money, something happened. He began to hear from all of these people in his life that they had experienced abuse. And he was sharing with me by him simply speaking out publicly about the issue and saying, hey, I'm raising money for this work. He broke the isolation that those victims had previously felt. And to me, he said, I just knew I had to do more. And from that point on, he's just become so engaged. He's formed a Team HEAL, he calls it, which is helping end abuse locally, and began organizing fundraisers and events where he speaks out against domestic violence and shares information and resources. And so that's just one example of how I think it's engaging lots of people in our community. We see the campaign cited in the news much more often the last couple of weeks in particular. I mean, I've been hearing from a lot of reporters. I was contacted from someone from the New York Times in response. She was doing research to everything that's going on in the NFL. And she said, I'm looking for what other teams do about it, and I can't find a single thing. And then I see this thing that the Mariners have been doing for 18 years, and just how surprised she was that they're so ahead of the curve. And to me, it's just an example of how kind of a long-term, steady, proactive approach can be so much more effective than the reactionary approach that we're seeing in a crisis situation. So the other successes of this is that we've heard from our membership that it's inspired some of them to use sports to engage men in prevention. We hear of people using the Coaching Boys into Men program that Futures Without Violence developed years ago. And we're just seeing people pick it up in their local communities, which is really exciting. And that this project has been really sustainable. We don't always have a sponsor. We don't always have funding. But this is our 18th year, and we kind of keep at it, and it's continued to grow over the years. There's definitely been challenges. This is not always an easy, challenge-free program. The first and maybe most obvious is that, hey, the baseball players can be abusers. I know, I'm sure that shocks all of you, but sometimes it happens when there's an abuser on the team. And, there's PR challenges to that, both for us and the Mariners. And that's really important for us to address that well, and for them as well. Another challenge is, of course, carving out time and space. This isn't something that people, funders or sponsors sign on for year after year, and so it's a constantly changing and shifting game to figure out how to support the work of it. These next 2 points really, I think Jonathan also touched on in his presentation, is that it is hard to describe the impact. It's hard to measure success when, a campaign like this and engaging the community in a 5K is just sometimes difficult to describe what we're achieving and how to measure that. To talk a bit about the PR challenge for sports teams to do the right thing, I think that this is where we see culture shift overall with what's happening, I think, with the NFL right now, is that it's harder for them to just ignore it. But in the past, teams, if they kind of stick their necks out and say we're against domestic violence, obviously there's that much more to hold them accountable to. And a few years ago there was a pitcher who was arrested for domestic violence, and the Mariners called us right away and we worked with them, and it was a challenge definitely for them. One of the ways that we respond, a lot of people also, to be honest, asked us, why are you going to dump this partnership? How can you be partners with somebody who has an abuser playing for them? To which we really talked about, well, I don't think there's a whole lot of employers that don't employ somebody who likely is an abuser. And for us, we want to continue to engage and to address that. Our executive director, Nan Stoops, wrote a piece on our blog about it where she talked about with this program, the Mariners do agree to be held to a higher standard. And we think that's a great thing. And we also expect them to do as they say. And so while learning and changing is slow and painful, we continue the partnership and try to work with them to do the right thing, both in their words as well as their actions. So sustainability, I'll just talk briefly about funding. At first, as I think I said, it just wasn't. It was a cold call. We didn't have any money for it. We just decided to give it a try and carved out a little bit of staff time. And then we had a state contract for a few years that was part of our community education money, where this was one of the activities that we did under that, which was to really help us just kind of develop the campaign and figure out the messages. We had one corporate sponsor early on, and then we had a little bit of money from our state coalition's grant. And at that time was when we hired a consultant and did a little bit. We did some focus groups with males from 18 to 35 years old, and that's when we first engaged that pro bono advertising firm to help develop those. And then that corporate sponsorship went away. We ran it for a few years without any money specifically for it. Again, just everything was in kind, donated. And then we got a partnership for a few years from Verizon Wireless. We had a little money as part of the Pepsi Refresh campaign. Then we had nothing again. It just sort of it's always shifting funds and resources. And the thing that we stick to is that we're going to do the campaign no matter what. We might not have as many resources or visibility one year as compared to the next, but we do kind of just keep doing it. And now it's gotten much more stable in funding in terms of that we actually have activities. The primary one is the 5K, which this past year raised over $100,000, which was very exciting. And then the Mariners also donate suites for us to bring funders into a game, and we get some support that way as well. So some of the lessons learned, and I know I'm tight on time, so I'm just going to go quickly through these, is that we always assume yes. We do not hesitate to ask the Mariners because experience has taught us that they surprise us oftentimes and just say yes. So we often go in with an assumption that why wouldn't they do it, and they often come back with, we believe partnering with you is the right thing to do. And so I do recognize that that is an unusual relationship with a professional sports team, but we definitely take advantage of that relationship. We've never seen losing a funding source as the end of the campaign. And I think that that's really unique too. I mean, personally, I haven't worked on a lot of projects where when the funding goes away, we just keep doing it, but find other creative ways of leveraging resources. But that has been a key thing with this campaign. And we have coupled it with this third strategy, which I call strike while the iron is cold, which means, the years, and sadly there have been a lot of them, when the Mariners are not doing very well are also the years when people do not ask them for things. And those are the years that we have asked for increased commitment to this campaign. And so, my slides are moving without me. So that's been one thing that we do is when we notice that they don't tend to take away resources. So when the team isn't doing well and a lot of people aren't asking things of them, that's when we ask for more suites to be donated, or that's when we decided to initiate the 5K. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Eileen to talk about conclusions.
So, this is really, Kelly has done such good work on this campaign, so in some ways I feel like I've sort of been, had the pleasure of kind of being an outside observer to it. So I just want to say thank you to Kelly for doing such great work, and Nan as well. But what I've really seen is that, the thing that I think is so compelling about it is that really what started as this campaign, what started as a TV spot, has become a program that people can join. So people now can be a part of it by going to the games and seeing the ads, or watching on TV and listening to the messages about domestic violence, and more importantly, really joining this 5K that we put on that is promoted throughout the season. And they come to the 5K, they kind of are awakened to this idea that we're not all, people that work in the domestic violence field aren't, all depressed and sitting in a corner, that we're actually really having fun, and that we have this great vision for people's lives that includes them. And then they decide, you know what, I really like this, and I'm going to start raising money for it. And they start, their own fundraising pages, like Kelly was talking about. And then ultimately what that does is it helps us to create these tools that we're able to share back with them. So at the beginning we talked about how we have used some of the funds that we've raised to actually create materials that then continue to promote healthy relationships and prevent domestic and sexual violence. So one of the things that we've done is we've created these healthier relationship cards. And when we released these, they went to every single person who went to the 5K, which means that 1,200 people got them in their goodie bags. And we're able then to go home and look at them and see, I can actually have conversations with every single person I know about relationships that are developmentally appropriate. So even if I have a 2-year-old and I haven't yet thought about how to talk about dating with my kids, I actually can talk about what being a good friend looks like. Or I've had this coworker, we always talk about everything else under the sun, including other people's relationships when we have coffee, but we don't talk about our own. Maybe I should start thinking about making that, something that we do all the time so that if something does come up, then we're already used to talking about it. So that's been really exciting. And this last year what we did was we promoted a blog series called Love Like This. Kelly mentioned that we have a blog called canyouRelate.org. And Love Like This is really, again, moving on that path of trying to really put forth what we want to see in people's relationships. So Love Like This shows you situations with really cute illustrations of cats, I have to say, about how to kind of do things in relationships in a healthy way versus a not so healthy way. So for example, we have stuff on, if you're jealous, what's a way to healthily express jealousy versus kind of, the over-the-top red flag stuff that we often see. And that progresses, and that's just a really nice way for people to talk. And finally, this young woman that we have in the picture, she and her family really kind of embraced the 5K as a way to memorialize her aunt, her mom's sister, and took this tragedy that was just really awful that we have heard about so many times in our field of women being killed by their partners, and instead has really taken this as an opportunity to partner with us and talk with all of her friends and the people in their community and really have this huge outpouring of love and support to really help others have healthy relationships. And so they won second place fundraising this year, and so that's her posing with her ribbon and the jersey that they got. But it really has been an incredible thing to be able to see people kind of pick up our torch and run with it and do things that, are so much better than if we did it. So that has been really fun to watch and be a part of.
Well, thank you so much. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier on is that Kelly and Eileen have stepped out of their statewide annual conference to be with us today. And I'm so glad you did because you had some excellent points. Thank you for sharing this program, this strategy. It's really great to hear from. We are going to ask this polling question and move on very quickly. We want to know what resonates for you from the Washington Coalition's experience. What rings true for you? Share some similar experiences. And I just want to give you the heads up that in the next 17 minutes, we're going to spend all of that time with the Texas Coalition, with the Texas Council, and we're going to sort of short shrift our closing. If you want to stay on just an extra minute, we might have some information for you. But without further ado, we will introduce the Texas Council on Family Violence and Gloria Aguilera-Terry, who serves on the steering committee of the IPV Prevention Council, as Casey mentioned, and Hilda Gutierrez. Gloria joined the council in 2008, and in her role as the CEO, she guides and directs the statewide activities of the Texas Council, such as the legislative session. She establishes and fosters statewide tactical partnerships, working with staff to provide the outstanding services that they provide to programs, and also strategically positioning the council to create the influence necessary to continue serving the needs of victims and their families. Hilda is the prevention coordinator for the Texas Council on Family Violence, a role she's had since 2008. I've had the great pleasure of working with Hilda on a few things over the years, and I've always learned a lot from her. She's worked in the anti-violence fields in New Mexico and Texas and serves on the boards of 2 immigrant rights organizations. And without further ado, we will let them present to you their engagement strategies.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gloria Terry. I know what it's like being the last presenter on a fairly long but informative webinar. I also just wanted, on behalf of the IPV Prevention Council, thank everyone who is on the webinar. And I know you heard a little bit about the council, and what I would add is that the council two primary purposes. One is to promote prevention as a sustainable priority for coalitions and local domestic violence programs. And the second priority is to proactively engage federal partners, funders, and other allied organizations. And in summary, what that means is we're really looking to have all of us facing in the same direction, and how do we complement, for example, the great work from Prevent Connect and Project Connect, so that we can all keep forward-facing when it comes to prevention across our country without tripping over each other, but supporting the individual efforts and expertise that everybody brings. So on behalf of the council, thank you for being here. Here in Texas, we decided, Hilda and I, to split our presentation into two parts. I was asked to really talk about engaging communities of influence. So we will cover two distinct strategies. One is how do you engage the funder philanthropic community? And then we really want to talk about how we engage the Texas High School Coaches Association. And I will tell you that the smartest thing that a coalition executive director can do is to surround herself with, or himself with, brilliant people. So I'm surrounded with Hilda and her expertise that she'll share with you in just a few minutes. So when we talk about the investor community in Texas, what I've put up here is 4 organizations that have have various levels of investment in prevention with the Texas Council. Certainly the Texas Health and Human Services Commission is the primary funder for intervention services. But the reason I put them up here is that every legislative session, and in Texas we have a biennial session, we request additional money from the legislature. And we purposely designate and request that a portion of this exceptional item funding, as it's called, is earmarked for prevention. The other money that is administered by the Health and Human Services Commission cannot be used for prevention activities. So in the state of Texas and probably across the country and to our territories as well, there isn't a unique and dedicated resource for prevention funding. So when we go to the legislature, we say we don't want to take any emphasis off of intervention funding, but we certainly think that our great state needs to invest in prevention activities as well. So for the last 3 sessions in which we had exceptional item funding approved by the legislature, a portion of it was dedicated to prevention, and it really allowed some of our programs in Texas to get much needed resources to implement some longer term prevention programming. This is usually a 2-year funding opportunity.
Hey, Gloria.
Yeah.
Gloria, I'm sorry to stop you. This is Casey. I wonder if you can just speak up a little bit. Some people are having difficulty hearing you.
I'm close to my phone, but I will speak louder. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you.
I also highlighted a couple of other foundations that have been successful with the Texas Council on Family Violence. Certainly the SCORE Foundation was one of our early investors in this work of prevention. The RGK Foundation, we have a longer established relationship with them, and I would say a handful of years ago really became more intrigued with the prevention work that we were doing. And then lastly, the Houston Endowment, again, has been a longtime supporter of the coalition and is excited and has approached us about developing specific efforts towards prevention and prevention investments. So when we talk about making the case, when I'm put in front of these funders and said, you know, what is it that has been successful for me? And I certainly know that for folks that are on this webinar and who will listen to this webinar, you may have your own strategies. These are things that have certainly worked for me and what has resonated with folks when I talk to them. You've heard me say this repeatedly while I've been on here, that I talk about it as an investor and not a funder. I do this because when you talk about it, talk to them as an investor, they are an active party to your efforts as opposed to being a funder and they're a bystander to your efforts. So I really talk about it in those terms. I really can guide my request or my ask or my conversation around knowing who my audience is. For some of these foundations, they really are interested in what is a return on investment. If we're going to give you our very precious funds, what can you demonstrate to us is a difference that they will make. And so just bringing them in at the outset that they are investing in our communities, they're investing in our families, they're investing in our future is much more different a conversation than me saying, would you fund this application? So I also identify with all the parties that we've interacted with, how can we help you meet one of your priorities? So certainly most foundations have a focus area that they want to fund. They want to make a deliberate impact in communities. So I'm going to do all of that background reconnaissance work so that when I bring in my case for support, it's helping them achieve one of their priorities. It just happens to be aligned with our priority as well. When I'm making the case, I still hear a lot about evidence-based. Is what you're doing evidence-based? Is evidence-based curriculum going to be used in this particular area? And so it's still a strong priority for the folks that I speak to. But what certainly has gotten them engaged is when I tell them, you're helping me build evidence. Your investment in this work is helping me build evidence, and that's been one way in which I can navigate that conversation with those funders. The other is, it's a continuing conversation, but everybody is still focused more on outputs. So how many people are you going to train, and or things of that nature, which you all will hear. So what we really do hard is to explain we're looking at outcomes and prevention. It's a marathon and not a sprint. You're not going to see specific outcomes from one year to the next. But what we can do is talk about, this impact that you're making. But we will also find some way to convey some metrics. We held these many coaching sessions, so we're able to somehow meet them in the middle. And what I'm trying to do is deliberately steer them away from outputs, but also give them some comfort by saying we can meet certain metrics. They're just not outputs. So successes and challenges along the way. I'll speak to successes first. Relationships have evolved beyond the investor relationship. The SCORE Foundation is a foundation of a very prominent Dallas Cowboy football player. It has evolved to where he has done 2 PSAs for us. When ESPN initially contacted him when the Ray Rice story first broke out, they contacted us for talking points. There's been continued conversation that have gone beyond what their funding relationship was with us. I would say the same thing in smaller ways has happened with the other foundations is when they get interest or they're looking to seek some expertise, they come back to us to say, what do you think? This is the issue in the community we're trying to address. What do you think? So engaging them in those ways. The successes is that they believe in our work and that they really respect the expertise that we possess and the expertise that we bring to the table, that we have a recognition that we're both investors, but we're investors that bring different skill sets and expertise to the work. And then I think that we've learned, and they have learned, that what it is that they prioritize will very likely overlay into the areas of what we're looking to prioritize as well. We have far more in common, and sometimes we can't see that at the outset. So what are some of the challenges? And certainly you all can relate to this. There's always competition for resources. The RGK Foundation has now put us on a every other year application process because of the demand that they have for it. that's just a reality. I think you heard the great people from Washington State kind of allude to the same thing. It ebbs and flows. I think what has happened to the Texas Council is that when one ebbs, the other flows, and so we've been able to kind of navigate those waters that way. Anytime that there's a change in administration, whether it's a grant officer or whether it's at the Health and Human Services Commission, you're having to reestablish all the groundwork that you had laid before. So bringing in all of those conversations and recognizing that it may be an old relationship to that entity, but if it's a new person, you're starting all over again. And so you're having to, it may sound repetitive to you, but you're trying to get that buy-in and re-engagement all over again. And again, from every facet that I hear is evidence-based approach is still important, and we can't dismiss that. You know, talking a little bit, I was asked to talk a little bit about sustainability. Like all relationships, you've got to nurture them. I'll tell you my best secret, and you guys can borrow this at any time. But I make random phone calls, and I'll say, hey, this is Gloria. I don't need anything today. I don't want anything today. I was thinking about you and called to see how you were doing. And that has paid off for me handsomely because I know that I appreciate it when I get that kind of a phone call. When it's a investor or funder relationship and I'm calling and it's not a problem or I'm not asking for money, they remember those days that I called and I wasn't looking for something in return. So again, looking at areas where our joint partnership creates success for both parties, they're there. They're absolutely there. You just have to identify what they are in your respective areas. When I think about, again, any of the foundations or the Health and Human Services Commission, what resonates with them is that they're trying to create the same social change. We can start at that place. We have a shared vision and purpose, and we can get there together. And then you can fine-tune that messaging. The other is I do launch their activism. So I've gone to foundations where I wasn't as successful, and I'll tuck that away for a little bit, and then when I do have one that is successful, I'll ask them, would you be willing to contact XYZ for me? Would you be willing to share this report with your colleagues at the other foundations who are looking to fund similar work? Would you promote prevention and investment in prevention with your quarterly foundation, things of that nature? So how do I use them to amplify the voice? What is it that struck for them an interest in funding prevention, and can they share that with their colleagues? So some of the conclusions and lessons learned, I think I try to put everything up there that we all do. You know, color outside the box, think a little bit differently, make sure that your enthusiasm is contagious, and be prepared that you're going to get some no's before you get some yeses, and that's okay. That it's a no for, I always say it's a no for right now, but I'll get you to a yes later, whatever that is. And then I always personally use the example of WD-40, right? And I know most of you probably know this, that it stands for Water Displacement 40th Formula. So it easily could have been WD-12 or WD-110, but it is about knowing that it's not unique to our work, that we have to keep fine-tuning our position, fine-tuning the way we make pictures, and you may be on your 40th formula before you hit success and consistency. As I said earlier, the smartest thing that an AD can do is surround herself or himself with brilliant people. So I'm going to kick it off to Hilda so that she has I know that we're really short on time. Do you want me to keep going? Lorien, Casey?
This is Kenya. I think we can take a few more minutes. So if Hilda wants to go ahead, then those who can stay on the line can continue to join us. And I think we'll only take about maybe another 10 or 15 minutes. So if Hilda can take 10 minutes, and then that'll give us about 5 minutes to wrap up.
Yeah, okay, sounds great. Can you hear me okay over there?
Yes, you sound great. Please go ahead.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to try to take up as little of time as possible while still kind of hitting the key points about our collaboration with the Texas High School Coaches Association. And I want to say first off that the Texas High School Coaches Association is one of the largest associations in the world of its kind. So we're very fortunate that it is housed, within 20 miles of where we work and have access to that community. And the way that it began, similarly, I think, to what the Washington Coalition shared, was that I just attended one of their conferences. I was interested in kind of learning, the landscape of Texas, how change can happen within the sports field, in particular because we know that in Texas, football is king, right? We know that football, if you're a football player, if you're a coach, right, you have a lot of presence within the school and you're a big change maker. So we wanted to understand that landscape. And I happened to be on their website, saw that they were bringing Joe Ehrmann. I'm not sure if some of y'all are familiar with Joe Ehrmann, but he's somebody that talks about coaching from the inside out. So really changing the way that coaches see their own roles. And I attended that training and realized that there was a lot of parallels between the work that the association was already doing and the work that we were doing. And so that kind of started the beginning of that relationship, was just kind of sitting down, going to that conference, meeting the key players, making sure that I introduced myself to Joe Ehrmann, to the executive director and the assistant executive director of the association. And I think that after that point, things just took off. We were able to get them to sign an MOU with us because we were thinking about doing boys into men more broadly. We were very fortunate at that time that we already had piloted Coaching Boys into Men, which, as the Washington Coalition mentioned, is a national program that engages coaches as leaders in changing the attitudes that athletes have around respect and violence against women and girls in particular. And so we had piloted some of Coaching Boys into Men in Arlington already. We're able to kind of start that conversation with the association with that information at hand. And so we had an ask right from the beginning, right? We have this MOU, we really have this vision of what we want to do. But I think that along the way we got to an understanding of what works for both of us. I think in our movement we have these traditional ways of working with different stakeholders, right? There's the MOU way, the getting them on board with funding. There's this idea of developing advisory boards, and these are all things that we tried. But what we learned along the way was that didn't necessarily work for them, right? And so we had to figure out, well, what does work for them, because they are interested in this topic. And I think that right now what we've been doing, we've been very fortunate that they've been kind of extending an open invitation to their coaches' conferences. And so what that means is that while people, vendors have to pay, thousands of dollars to attend these coaches' conferences, we get to go for free, which is pretty amazing. It really gives us the opportunity to reach out to those coaches that really do care about this issue. And that's so Gloria's asking me to talk about how many attendees. Well, the largest conference that they have, which they have every year, gathers about 20,000 coaches. So it really is important for us to have that visibility there, because we are able to reach, such a large amount of coaches. And like I said, I think that understanding the context of their work was really important, because for me, when I think of coaches, when I think of sports, I have this very narrow image of what that means. And I think that the more that I talked to them, the more conversations that I had with them, the more I understood how they considered themselves mentors, and how this issue of violence against women or violence against girls wasn't new to them. We didn't have to make the case, convince them that this is an issue. They understand that it's an issue. They're seeing it, right? I think both Coach Rutledge and Coach Martin, who are the heads of the association, disclosed early on that a lot of their athletes were coming from these homes where violence was happening, and that a lot of times they didn't know what to do about it. And so I think that it was a very eye-opening experience for me to have those conversations with them and to understand the context of their work. The other piece that was eye-opening that because football is king in Texas, there is no semester dedicated to football, right? It's a full year endeavor. And so that really opens the doors to possibilities in terms of what coaches can do. So it doesn't necessarily just, a program like Coaching Boys into Men doesn't necessarily have to happen only during the season, right? It doesn't have to be a reactive thing. Coaches actually take the time to do character development during their off season, and they actually pay for curricula on character development. So thinking about Coaching Boys into Men as something that builds character, it builds that athlete from the inside out was really important, I think, for them as well. And it was kind of like some of the coaches that I talked to, described that to me, that they were already doing this work, and this was another tool that they could just use. So another program that we work with a lot, obviously, are the Originators, which are Futures Without Violence. And they've offered us some wonderful support, resources, training, evaluation, just all of those beautiful polished materials that they had available to them. And that really helped us, as we were trying to engage our local programs, as we were trying to engage different stakeholders. It really helped, the kind of support they were able to offer. And also that this was evaluation-based. The curriculum has demonstrated that it shifts those behaviors, which is critically important for our programs and for our funders. And so that it was really important, has been really important for us to continue that relationship with Futures throughout the years, and they've been able to offer us webinars and do some trainings. I've been able to do some trainings also with our constituents, and they're always really well attended. I mean, people are very interested in this topic, thinking about, athletes as change makers. So some of the successes and challenges that we've had along the way, like I said or mentioned earlier, we did have an advisory board of coaches, and those were primarily coaches that served on THSCA, the Texas High School Coaches Association, on their board. And so it was actually kind of challenging for them to do both things. So that ended up not, taking hold as we wanted it to take hold. The evaluation component that was offered through CBIM, from a prevention perspective, we're really excited about the evaluation, but coaches, that's not their thing, So whenever we try to get the coaches to do the evaluation, to lead the evaluation efforts, it just became kind of challenging for them to do. So the evaluation was helpful in getting in the door, but we couldn't necessarily expect the coaches to do that part of the work. The conferences that I said, the Texas High School Coaches Association conferences have been really helpful. In particular, they have one which is called their Leadership Summit, and that one brings together different leaders within the coaching community in Texas, and whether that be superintendents, athletic directors, et cetera. And their primary focus of those conferences is thinking about coaches as mentors, in particular with youth who don't have father figures in their home. And so they've been really focusing, for the past couple of years, have been focusing on developing this concept of coach as mentor, coach as that individual that steps in when the father is no longer present. And even though that's not necessarily our message, it does resonate in a way, in terms of the mentorship way. And so they were able to bring in some very amazing speakers that kind of promote that idea, right, that push coaches to think, as they say, beyond the X's and O's, that push coaches to understand that a lot of the athletes are not going to make it to the major leagues, right? A lot of the athletes are going to do high school football, and that's about it. And so really helping them, kind of propelling them towards the academic side, towards being that mentor, towards seeing that change. And some of as Jonathan mentioned, one of the coaches that I've talked to have said, it doesn't really matter, the consequence or the impact, that I'm going to have with this athlete isn't going to take place next year or the year after that. Really, until this person lives out in the community, becomes a man, right, and is living out the goals of our community and what we've been talking about, that's when I'm really going to know the change that I've had, right, 20 years down the road, not right now. So that's been a huge success to access those coaches that are already vested in this issue in some way. And again, trainings for prevention staff have been huge successes. They've helped us understand kind of where our programs are in terms of their needs and their interests. And I think just in terms of sustainability, having those trainings, resources, evaluation from from futures and having that be a continuous relationship has been really helpful. The tabling opportunities we have with the association also really helpful. We're a continuously visible presence at those conferences, and it's very interesting because even though the advisory board didn't necessarily take hold, those members still come up to me at those conferences all the time, and they will make it a point to shake my hand, introduce myself, ask about the program. So they're always excited about doing that. This program, just FYI, doesn't require much funding, and so that's also something to keep in mind, that we're able to do this work on a very minimal budget. It really is about getting me to the conferences, making sure that we have some materials available to distribute, and that's about it. So it has large impact, but small funding, which is positive. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier in terms of the lessons learned, but gaining understanding of the work that they do in the context of their work is really important. Connecting the dots is also really important. And by what I mean about that is that it was important for the coaches to meet Gloria. It was important for the coaches to meet futures, to meet our managers, to meet all the people that are invested in this work. That was really important because they needed to see that there was momentum around this, right? And I think when I say consistency matters, I think that it matters that Gloria and I have been working with the coaches and with futures, since it's basically been since 2010 and 2011 respectively. So we've learned a lot, about the work that all of us do and figuring out, how we can work together. And this concept of yes and, right? So it's like whenever they ask me, do you want to do this conference, it's always a yes. There's never a no, it's yes. And then we start thinking about, well, what else can we do? How else can we partner? And this is I think, what has allowed us to continue our work. So I'm going to close with that. Just because I know that we're short on time. And thank you so much for sticking around, for those of you that did.
Oh, Hilda, thank you so much. I'm really glad that so many, almost the whole group is able to stay on to hear the lessons learned from that experience and working with the coaches. Very inspiring, as Debbie says. I do think that we're going to dispatch with our closing polls, just to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank all of our presenters for offering their insights, David and Eileen and Kelly and Gloria and Hilda, and all of the participants who contributed so many interesting ideas and continuing that dialogue about what works and what doesn't. This is very inspiring. Please know that the engagement section of the PreventIPV.org website will be up and running in October, and there will be so much more information along the lines of what we've all heard today to make the case and to make the connections, not just for funders, but for other community partners. So really looking forward to that, and that's all under the leadership of Jonathan, who you heard from today. He's working very hard to pull all of that together, along with some of the information that you've provided today for those of you who were able to share your insights. That will all be collected. Casey, are there any closing thoughts from you?
I just want to echo what you said, Lorien. I really appreciate everybody's time. Please feel free to follow up with any of us or all of us, for more information and details, and join us in the PreventIPV online community. Thanks, Lorien, for your amazing facilitation today. And please continue to send any questions you might have our way, and we'll be sure to address them in a follow-up.